Welcome. This is Brett Johnson, New York City with OneMedRadio. Today I am with Kimberly Ha. She is the global editor of BioPharm Insight, a business intelligence service which is part of the Financial Times Group. It's focused on analysis and breaking news in the global healthcare sector. Thanks for joining us today, Kimberly.
Thank you, Brett, for having me here.
So I know you'll be moderating a panel for the OneMed Forum in San Francisco in January on sort of the big issues shaping some of the growth companies in the biotechnology and specialty pharma space. Can you just give us sort of your view as we kind of close out 2011, what you see as some of the big trends that you're seeing in the emerging biotechs?
Sure. I think right now, the recent news on the Gilead Sciences acquisition for Pharmaset, a company developing a novel hepatitis C therapeutic called PSI 7977, definitely is really exciting for the entire space, because that sort of signals large pharma trend right now towards being actually more open to acquiring and taking these big bets on, a compound that hasn't really even started phase 3 trials yet. The results of the phase 2 trials is sort of what Gilead Sciences is banking on. And if you look at the premium that they've offered for Pharmaset, I think that really speaks to the magnitude for how desperate companies are right now. I mean, not just with the patent cliff, but just looking beyond that, in the next 4 or 5 years, really trying to anticipate, getting ahead of the competition in terms of having a key asset that could potentially transform and revolutionize hepatitis C therapy by really cutting down the therapeutic time frame to shortening the duration.
Mm-hmm. So, Kimberly, a lot of the big pharmaceutical companies have increasingly been looking to make acquisitions from smaller companies in the biotech space, as opposed to developing R&D internally. Is that a trend that is continuing, and what's going on in terms of sort of the acquisitions of companies?
I think right now one of the trends we're definitely seeing is that large pharma is increasingly partnering, not just with other startup biotech companies or pharmaceutical companies, but really looking to partner and sign collaborations with academic institutions. So that definitely is interesting. They're definitely looking earlier stage. I think one of the hottest areas right now in terms of acquisitions continues to be oncology, followed by neurology. I think areas where collaborations have really sort of dwindled, or where we saw partnership collaborations being cut, really has been in the areas where the drugs require large-scale sort of primary care sales forces, for example, in the areas of cardiovascular or in diabetes care. We've definitely seen a lot of partnership collaborations sort of terminate, and I think this really speaks to how difficult drug development has been for compounds in development in areas such as diabetes and the cardiovascular area, where there's already a lot of treatment options for patients, and it gets increasingly difficult to get these new therapies approved. And right now, I guess in this current cost environment, even though your drug's approved, you still have to get through the reimbursement hurdle. So that's something that we've really seen affect, FDA approval and sort of what is the percentage of, a particular drug getting approved, and how that sort of affected M&A. So I think key examples would be a lupus drug that we've been covering on our product, Human Genome Sciences and GSK's lupus drug, Benlysta, that was launched, I believe, earlier in March of this year. And a lot of people, before the launch said, well, Human Genome Sciences, there hasn't been a new drug in lupus for the last 50 years. This is a prime acquisition candidate, or other instances where we've covered companies like Dendreon with its novel cancer vaccine Provenge, and I think at that time a lot of people, a couple of years back or even last year said, Dendreon, that's a great takeover candidate for a lot of companies, but I think what we've seen with both these drugs, Benlysta and Provenge, is that it's really the companies have sort of reported lackluster sales, which has really made companies, on the buying side, really sort of risk averse, because now it's sort of, okay, well, do I really want to pay a premium for a drug that, even though it's approved, might not actually have that great of a launch after approval? So I think what we've seen in terms of a trend side, in terms of deal structures, that companies are increasingly building in, I guess you could say, into the deal areas where, you would have to show, that your drug is approved, and you'd have to meet certain milestones before you get an extra amount. So yeah, that's definitely one area. And I think another interesting trend is that from the large pharma side, if you're the small biotech or if you're planning an exit, I think what I would say is, you really try, if you're the CEO at a small biotech, you really want to try to start talking to large pharma or whoever you're trying to approach regarding either partnership or maybe even strategic exit much earlier in the process. So maybe that potential buyer or that partner could start looking at, the drug's development, much earlier, for example, in phase 2, whether or not these are the right clinical endpoints that, the large pharma partner would want you to start taking a look at, because then it gets more difficult if, you're pitching your company to a potential buyer or a potential partner and they disagree with you on the clinical endpoint that you've chosen for your trial, or maybe even, the comparator drug that you've chosen for your clinical trial. So I think just talking to large pharmaceutical companies or potential partners earlier in the process, earlier in the drug development process, will really help you, as a startup biotech or even a small to mid-sized biotech company, save costs and time.
So, Kimberly, I know you mentioned earlier that oncology and neurology are some of the hot areas. Can we talk first about what are some of the things you're seeing in the area of oncology?
Sure. I think in the area of oncology right now, one of the major scientific conferences coming up is the American Society of Hematology Conference next month, December actually, where a number of companies will be presenting key data. I think most notably every year, everyone sort of looks out to Celgene to see what they'll be presenting, but there's definitely a lot of interest from, smaller companies such as, Wyand Biosciences, Insight, and also Seattle Genetics. I think a lot of people will be watching out for their data being presented there. In oncology right now, I think the key really is for a, startup biotech or a company that, is trying to get funding. You really need to start thinking about developing your lead candidate with a biomarker or some type of companion diagnostic, because increasingly what we've seen is that it just helps with reimbursement. It really smooths out the FDA approval process if you, as a company, can really show the agency that, your drug has a specific response in these particular group of patients, and if the higher the response rates, the better. Basically, I think one of the key poster child, examples of this really is Pfizer's newly approved lung cancer drug, crizotinib, which received FDA approval with a diagnostic by Abbott, which basically tests for this specific mutation on the ALK gene, and currently only 4% of patients in lung cancer have this. So I guess on one side, even though the response rates are higher, I guess from a company standpoint, you'd really only be able to market this therapy to a specific, I guess, a smaller percentage of patients out of the overall market. But in terms of from a cost standpoint, instead of going for an application and then having it get rejected and then refiling it again, why not just develop it from the get-go with a companion diagnostic or with a biomarker strategy much earlier on? And there are now a number of companies that will help you sort of find and identify potential markers for any of your oncology candidates. There's a private company I spoke with, BioVista, that is actually a biomarker company, and they have a novel platform and technology to actually help you identify particular markers. So that definitely is one trend that is very common right now.
I believe BioVista will be presenting at the OneMed Forum in San Francisco. Okay. In the area of neurology, any thoughts on some big trends there?
Sure. I think in the areas of neurology, I think the hottest two sectors from an investment standpoint that I always hear about is really, still in the area of Alzheimer's. There's still a lot of VC interest in Alzheimer's, and increasingly a lot more interest in multiple sclerosis and companies developing novel multiple sclerosis therapies or second-generation MS therapies to the newly approved drugs currently on the market. And I think this sort of explosion of interest in MS therapies really started with Novartis's Gilenya approval, which is the world's first oral MS pill for the treatment of multiple sclerosis. And I think with that, in terms of if you look at the MS development right now, there are a number of companies developing, new oral therapies in MS. But I think really the opportunity right now for neurology and sort of the billion-dollar market really still has to be Alzheimer's disease. I think next year will be a pivotal year for companies developing therapies in Alzheimer's because next year at the Alzheimer's meeting, ICAD, I believe it's mid next year, Wyeth, I guess now Pfizer, will be announcing pivotal results for their phase 3 trials from their Alzheimer's immunotherapy. It's an antibody, bapineuzumab. So that definitely, I think with that, the industry will sort of see, well, okay, amyloid therapies, do these actually work or not? Because I guess giving you the background, a lot of drugs in Alzheimer's, it's historically been sort of, it's been coined the term graveyard of failure. So it's a number of companies through the last 5 years that have really failed to develop their compounds further in phase 3. So I think just having that first disease-modifying therapy will be a huge jump for companies developing Alzheimer's drugs. But the deals are still happening despite this, and there's still a lot of startup companies, especially along the West Coast area, developing novel Alzheimer's therapies.
Well, hopefully we'll see some of those companies at the OneMed Forum, which is in San Francisco. I've been with Kimberly Ha, who is the global editor for BioPharm Insight. She will be moderating the panel at the OneMed Forum on January 11th on emerging developments and companies in the biotechnology space. Thanks so much for joining us today, Kimberly.
Thank you, Brett.
This is Brett Johnson from OneMed Radio signing off in New York. Good day.